Welcome back to Making It Awkward. I'm your host, Jessica Wilson.
Okay, so you know how I've been obsessed with the dumpster fire, the Washington Post drop? Is this about that drama with the dietitians in General Mills? Yeah, so they're calling out these anti-diet dietitians for teaming up with General Mills. So they're mad that social media dietitians are doing ads? Like, this is social media. Those are commercials. Yes, exactly. So explain this to me like I'm 5 because I'm not getting it.
All right. Today's episode is part 2 of 3 on the article about anti-diet dietitians from the Examination and Washington Post. Today, I'm delighted to bring you my conversation with Clara Nosek. Part 1 was 2 weeks ago, titled Anti-Diet Dietitians Made Cereal Ads and Then Things Got Awkward. Part 3 is next week. You'll hear my interviews with 2 people from the article, creator Jay Rochon and dietitian Kara Harbstreet. Both talk about what led them to where they are today and what anti-diet means to them. We chat about the impacts of the article on their lives, and I get to ask them both what they think about the article and anti-dietitians overall. One thing I haven't mentioned yet in this series is that I'm not an anti-diet dietitian. I understand why it's important for people to label themselves as such and align with the movement, but personally, the label and community isn't complex enough and tends to flatten a lot of the experiences of my friends and clients. I also want to show that there is something different out there for people in this false dichotomy. More than once, I've been told that I must be pro-diet if I'm not anti-diet, and that's just boring and sad. I don't bring any attachment to the movement coming into this or next week's episode. Clara Nosek is also not an anti-diet dietitian, but she is one of the reasons that my interview of Sasha Chapkin almost didn't happen. The Examination and at least one Washington Post journalist were monitoring Clara's TikToks about the article, and one or more of them was diving deep enough to see that I had commented with a laughing emoji on one of her videos. I'd like to take this moment to congratulate Clara on being both important enough and threatening enough that she was being monitored. My emoji was how I ended up on the phone with Sasha on the Sunday before we recorded. The editors at the Examination had concerns. Note, this is a correction to the initial episode in which I said the Washington Post had the concerns. Sasha told me that the editors thought Clara was making these videos to, quote, score points with her followers. There was concern that I was going to use the interview to do the same. A couple of things here. One, what game do they think Clara and I are playing? Am I just here for shits and giggles? Is talking about health disparities, how the eating disorder field falls short, trans healthcare, and that there are leaders in the public health field, like Dr. Robert Lustig, believing that starvation is better than eating processed foods, a joke to someone? Let me know, because I think I missed the punchline. And 2, in my interview with Sasha, he said they were paying attention to the criticism of the article and taking it seriously, so my emoji shouldn't matter. I'm confused. The Examination may have been concerned that my laughing emoji means that I'm not objective and couldn't do an interview of someone I critique. I don't think that in 2024, we need to pretend that legacy news is opinion-free, let alone podcasts. If this article was supposed to somehow be absolutely unbiased, Anand O'Connor, one of the co-authors from the Washington Post, wouldn't have been one at all. He started the app Lose It and co-authored a book about it. He believes that, quote, calorie counting is an effective way for people to lose weight by simply creating a deficit. Burn more calories daily than you consume, and you'll be surprised at how easy losing weight can actually be. End quote. This is not universally true, and many of us understand and have read journal articles about how far more goes into body weight and weight loss than calories in and calories out. So trusting O'Connor to report on nutrition science and public health is suspect. It's also consistent with the article's focus, though, on individuals rather than social determinants of health, genetics, and environment. I have never pretended to be objective. It's literally impossible for anyone. If people want to do deep dives into my likes and comments, feel free. but don't pretend it has anything to do with whether or not I can have a respectful conversation and how I do my work. And with that, I bring you my conversation with Clara. Clara, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me again.
I'm so glad that you joined us. I just want to lead this off by asking you a very important question.
Yes.
Are you playing a game? And if so, what is it?
I am playing a silly game, hoping to win a silly prize.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to say how you go about scoring points in this game?
Through likes, follows, and shares.
Okay. Yes.
I'm actually paid by Big Game.
Big game. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Big Game.
Mm-hmm.
And my prizes, once I'm fully vested,
Okay.
will be available to me in a diversified portfolio of stock and buyout options.
Lovely.
But I have to wait. The vesting is quite extensive.
The vesting is quite expensive. Yeah, I understand. I have not been acquired by Big Game yet, so I am unable to participate. But I mean, I think maybe if you and I stay in collabs, I can get there.
Yeah, once they start to see that we're engaging in on social media,
okay,
it will be a green flag.
Yeah. The people will have heard how concerns came about, and I would love to hear your thoughts.
After listening to your podcast with Sasha, I am still confused about what exactly the positive change is and its relation to shitting on dietitians. I will say I saw an article by the Washington Post celebrating a renal dietitian. So it's not all dietitians.
Hashtag.
Just some of them. Just the anti-diet ones. Which is ironic because if you think about it, in renal dietetics, all foods could fit.
Yeah.
Which is kind of in line with
including cereal.
The ethos of anti-diet.
Oh, and to give credit where credit is due, the examination, it seems like the one who was leading this and who has had like the hardest stance on dietitians thus far.
Oh yeah, it's independent. That's
independent in collaboration. So it was a Wednesday morning. I got a text from you. Have you seen the newest article? And I'm sure you had already had 10,000 thoughts by the time you texted me the article. What were your initial critiques and thoughts about the article?
First thought, another Clara expose. Like, this is so weird. And then I wrote about this in my Substack. I was like, oh, that's interesting. The intro to this article is very interesting. And then I was like very excited as I was reading it to see who the YouTubers were.
Sure.
I was like, oh my God, I can't wait. Because in my mind, I already had an idea how one could take the general information that you find from the internet and then apply it to yourself.
Okay.
Even though medical information on the internet is not to be applied to oneself without the care of your individual's healthcare team. Just gotta put that disclaimer in there. But I was shocked that one, they didn't even name anyone on YouTube, and then quick jumped to TikTok, which was interesting. And then I was reading that, and it was like the General Mills campaign to derail the shame.
Right.
And then I thought it was interesting that they had featured Kara's video, and then they did something, they talked about other things about like anti-diet, and I was like, okay, I feel like you're not really understanding it, but that's okay. I think it's important to see how it can be interpreted. So I feel like this is a really good opportunity to show how there's a miss, right? The way that anti-diet is being communicated and the way that it's being received, they're not lining up. And so it opens up space for this misunderstanding. And I feel like I have made content about this because it's like, what is it really saying? What are we really doing? What's the point of making these kinds of content anti-diet things?
Okay.
If like it's being received this way.
Yeah.
But like in true whistleblower like fashion, I feel like it's like, well, what do you know? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like, zip it. Like, you cannot be a naysayer. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but like being a naysayer in this space.
No, I know nothing about being a naysayer in the health at every size and intuitive eating spaces. People always take my critiques very well.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So speaking from my lived experience, it's like it's not good. It's usually it's not as well received as one would hope.
Yeah.
Until someone else says it.
Someone
who might
else?
not look like who doesn't look like you or me.
What?
I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I feel like I was like, okay, yeah, I get it. I get why they're having this interpretation. I also get why other people who don't have maybe like the health literacy, the social media literacy, the ability to discern an interpretation from like, oh, this is what the study says. And run with it. And so from that perspective, I'm like, yeah, I kind of get it. It felt like they were just throwing all of these points at a wall.
Agree.
And what we got was what stuck.
Yeah.
So you get like the rise of intuitive eating Google searches, which is interesting because I would love to see the rise of other Google searches in conjunction, like at the same time. Because then I feel like if it is much higher than, say, the Google search for keto, the Google search for
intermittent fast,
ice baths, the Google search for 72-hour deodorant, right? What is very growing in popularity over the same time? Because then I think it would give you a better picture. And like, I think that if intuitive eating, anti-diet was growing exponentially where everything else kind of is growing, but not as fast, I feel like that would be like, oh, this is very interesting. But it didn't have that. There was no contextual information provided. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then there was the blurb about Christy, who wrote an entire Substack. Basically, I got the gist of it is that it felt more so like she's like, this is what I actually said and this is what they took from it, which what was taken was not in alignment with her intention. And I would wonder then if in her experience, nothing that you've ever said has gotten twisted, intentionally misinterpreted. You've never experienced that in life like that. Like, I feel like being on social media, I feel like, and I think you are too, very intentional with the words you choose. Okay.
Yeah.
And so like to be taken aback by what happened in that article, I think is very telling. So there was that. Oh, and then the ASDA intuitive eating quotes. I was like, this is interesting.
It is. It was too much for me. The arguments that were supposed to be made about health, like Jay's story in there said nothing about her health. It was her experience with weight stigma and experience with her weight, which I get. But then it was supposed to be about big cereal and how like this co-optation was making people unhealthier. But like those lines were never connected. And then we're talking about anti-diet, we're talking about ASDA, we're talking about intuitive eating, but also the sponsorship. And I'm like, it sounds like there were ads. It was so much happening. I still wasn't able to pull it out after I was able to interview Sasha as well. I think it was supposed to be the expose that anti-diet dietitians are taking industry money to co-opt messages. I think that's what maybe my mom took away before she sent me the article.
Nice.
But that's not a public health concern. And it's supposed to be like a public health investigation. I don't know. That's kind of where I still am about it. And then Caitlin on TikTok, one of the co-authors, was like, these anti-dietitians are making dangerous claims.
But didn't she also say that, or was that Anjali who said that the things that they mostly saw were positive?
Yes, in the same, I think it was the same TikTok video in which Caitlin said anti-dietitians are making dangerous health claims. It was also like, oh, and it was beneficial, and the conversations about eating disorders and da-da-da. I was like, all right, I can hold multiple things at one time, but this is kind of just reinforcing for me that there's something, what is the story that we're trying to tell here? I still don't know.
I don't think they know, to be honest.
And I find that to be the case with a lot of people who are not in the field, like just picking bits and pieces. And I was like, why is this the bit in the piece? It feels personal. It feels like you all or one of y'all or someone has had like a very negative experience with either Kara at Street Smart RD or something. It's giving something more than what I'm getting off the paper. It could have just been about cereal. It really could have been about the whole dietetics field and why the fuck was General Mills like even at Fancy? Like, why did they have a slide? Like, that's concerning.
Right. Well, they were right next to PepsiCo. And I think, like, yeah, if we're talking about big food industry and its role in shaping food choices,
yes,
I think that would have been a fantastic article.
100%.
Let's talk about Nestle. Let's talk about what they're doing to coffee farmers in Mexico. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the lobbying for or against maternal postpartum care. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about why all of those other big food brands, because it wasn't the way that they framed it too, I thought was very interesting, that they said that General Mills was standing against the FDA, their revision of like healthy, right? And how you can label healthy and all the new labelings that would be present on packaged foods. Mm-hmm. And when I did a quick Google search, as one does, I found that it was not just General Mills, correct, right? Like, why are all these other big food companies also taking a stance, pushing back against this FDA change? And I think that would have been a more interesting story, mm-hmm. but it probably is because the other food companies weren't paying anti-dietitians. But I'm sure that if I did a quick TikTok, Instagram search, I would be able to find an ad for a food mm-hmm. that is produced by one of those big food companies. Mm-hmm. But I guess it wouldn't fit in the narrative of what is Kara doing on the internet? Why is she doing anything on the internet? Can she not?
Can she not do ads?
Stop posting anything
on the internet.
Yeah, don't do ads. I just think that like it felt so like grasping at straws written. And then the TikTok, I feel like, made it worse. So I wasn't even going to address it on my own social media. I was like, people were sending it to me. I'm like, this is not worth mm-hmm. discussing. Mm-hmm. Like, just don't pay attention to it. Leave it alone. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's rage farming.
Agreed.
And
because it's not doing anything else like for us, like what am I supposed to do differently after reading this article?
Exactly. Well, and I think that it's rage farming in the sense that like it's playing into how algorithms work.
Yes.
Right. That's the allure of social media. That's the allure of clickbait articles, mm-hmm. is that they are lighting up that inflammatory process that feels good when you engage with it. Like if you comment, you interact, the internet's like, oh, you like this stuff. Let me send you more of this stuff. And then those people who engage kind of in that cycle of social media inflammation stay online longer, and then they get shown more ads, and then they make the companies more money. And so I feel like part of it was just to engage with that demographic, which makes sense, to one, highlight easily accessible foods, because food is a very political topic, especially here in America. And like, I think that, there's a lot of healthism involved. There's a lot of rugged individualism. There's a lot of those pieces play a role into people's food choices. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, you're getting a chance to shit on women, which also is like punching down. I feel like it's very easy. In a industry where a lot of those women have had tumultuous relationships with food before mom, before friend, sister, wife, like all those things, it becomes an identity, which in itself is a red flag and could be another.
That's another, yes.
Another episode. But I think that this article was like doing a lot of that stuff, and it, to me, it kind of like makes sense. Why wouldn't you lob this ball into the air where you have the opportunity to shit on processed foods, to shit on women, to shit on, like, make spectacle of a person who it's like insidious. Like Jay is a larger bodied white woman. But in the context of this entire thing, it's like, here's this woman who is bamboozled. And who do we love more to come to the rescue of than a white woman? And it's like, what, like, okay. Like, all right, I get it. I get why this clickbait article exists, why this is happening. And so I guess that's the positive change, that we all get to do something together.
So there were 10 things that this article could have been about, but I love your rage farming.
We should start pitching them.
I tried. I don't know if I've told you this, but after the first article, the examination was like, basically, come in and tell us basically who's being a shitty anti-dietitian out there. First of all, I was like, why are you not covering me? I'm talking about processed foods all the time. Oh, but also if we look at the like anti-dietitians that were on the first article, they were all like pale beige, thin, and very beautiful. All of, I'm just not that one. So I'm like, oh, okay. Like, also that makes sense.
They were like, the algorithm won't like you, to be honest.
People are already mad at you for different reasons. Like, we can't drum up any more rage about you. So yeah, that ship has sailed. We're now in 2024. We need to just go in a different direction. But you know what the story could be? Like, why is there redlining and food apartheid? Like, how could we be talking about public health in a way that might like not just make somebody not choose aspartame? Like, what about food? Like it was also this conversation that wrapped around into the one we had about the responsibility and the role of big food companies and why fast food is in these places, which was like a rebuttal to my topic of why aren't we talking about food apartheid? And we'll like, fast food plays a big role. Big food plays a big role. Why are there fast food companies here? And why is that oftentimes the only meal that is accessible to people? Wait, so Dr. Lustig actually says, don't choose it and starve. Like, how is also that not a conversation? Why is starving and McDonald's the two options here? That's the story. But then we get this instead.
They're like, the best I could do. You know that GIF? There's like that meme from Pawn Stars.
I don't. Break it down.
You don't watch Pawn Stars?
Unfortunately, that is what I'm saying here.
So the premise of the show is it's like this pawn shop, and people come in and they try to sell their stuff. And sometimes they're like, the best I can do. Oh. So someone will be like, I want $50,000. They're like, the best I can do is like $1,000 cash right now.
That is me. I'm like, I want all of this. Like, if this is a true investigative situation, if we are trying to change the lives of people, there are, I don't want to say easier stories to cover, but like wouldn't require all this data analysis of anti-diet hashtag, all these things. There are stories that are right here that could change so many like regulations that are not just front of package marketing for cereal.
Right.
It's a thought.
And I feel like those videos do really great on TikTok. So why wouldn't you turn them into a news article to get to a different demographic? Right.
You're
because
right about
sometimes the the demographic that's reading Washington Post articles
Mm-hmm.
might be, if we're making Venn diagrams,
okay, let's.
Right? It's not exactly a circle from the people who get their information from TikTok or Instagram or YouTube or wherever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it's like, I have seen those TikTok videos about like, let's talk about how this company is doing, exploiting these people, and those videos go viral. And I it's interesting to say like General Mills is saying it's food shaming to put high added sugar on a food,
Mm-hmm.
which they very well, like, I'm not saying that big food is not absolved from blame. Like, they are also to blame for this. Like, they're not perfect either. And I think that like exploring those things would give people actionable steps. One, can we make better consumer choices? Absolutely. Can you educate a consumer to be better with their health literacy in terms of what they're consuming? 100%. But then knowledge isn't the only influence for a food choice.
No.
And I think like it's a very weird, like, if you do X, you will get Y situation. If you work hard, you will be rewarded. No, you won't. If you
make
clean,
good choices, you will be rewarded.
Right.
Wait.
But you won't.
Can you make choices? Like, who is what the... I don't... So, yes, to go back to your absolute point of two separate circles rather than a Venn diagram. Yeah. I mean, this is all very interesting in the context of, like, the Examination and the Washington Post still need to make money. Like, so who are they speaking to? Are they, like, waving the red flag about food apartheid? No. They're, yes, rage baiting, people who are already mad about cereal in the first place and who would never actually eat it in the first place. But, let's get angry about it and write all these comments underneath the article.
Right. And it's nice to be able to point the finger.
Yeah.
And even better, pointing the finger at a woman. Because like I feel like you could make this same article, but feature all the biohackers.
Oh, please, let's.
But the food that they're marketing, right? So it would be like powders and dusts and clean packaged foods, supplements that you have no idea if that supplement is even in that supplement.
Right.
Anti-aging biohacker dudes mostly fit conventional, what you would ascribe beautiful for a man. I guess I'm not used to talking about men.
Conventionally.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you eat this way, you'll be rich. Right? Like and I think that article wouldn't do as well because as a culture, we don't shit on men. We only shit on women.
Mm-hmm.
And so why not make this article to get all those clicks and views? It's just sad. It could have been so much better.
Mm-hmm. I really think so. There is so much to talk about.
And
it
was a lot. It was emotionally roller coaster. But
going up the slide of cereal and down the slide of Cheerios.
After listening to your podcast with Sasha, I appreciated. I'm gonna make you a shit sandwich. I appreciated the acknowledgement of social determinants of health.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a red flag I think he says, while acknowledging social determinants of health is valid, the nutrition experts still all say that nutrition plays a major role. And so it's kind of like, I think that there is a misunderstanding that your food choice is at the same level as your social determinant of health. You can't really quantify it, but what we can quantify is all the studies that have been done about your zip code being a really great indicator for health outcomes. And he was very, very much concerned with the 42% of Americans who have been diagnosed with obesity, which is more than 2 times other industrialized countries, which sent up a little bing in my head. So I'm like, let me Google this. And I actually, I wondered, I was like, oh, I wonder if that takes into consideration when the NIH changed BMI cutoffs in the 90s. I wonder how much of that impacted that 42%. Mm-hmm. And if that came up in their extensive research. Mm-hmm. But in my Google rabbit hole, I found an NPR article, a transcript of an episode where they were discussing how Americans are getting shorter. So I was like, well, why is that? And so I read it, and it was so fun. I will send you the link. I was talking to Delina about it, and she's like, okay, all right. Well, basically, the TLDR of the article is that Americans are getting shorter. Why is this? And height globally can be used as an indicator for status, health status, industrialization, all those things. You can kind of extrapolate how well a country is doing based on how tall their people are. And in the article, they talk about how in the Netherlands, those motherfuckers are tall. And why is it? Is it the nutrition? And they note how big milk, cheese plays a role in the food culture in the Netherlands. But there's a huge dairy campaign in America, right? Got milk, those milk ads. Mm-hmm. So with the access of milk being so high in America, why are Americans still getting shorter? Why are we a country full of short kings?
Because it's clearly about diet. I mean, isn't it?
Right. And, well, that's the big question. They talk also about how access to social and governmental support could play a role in those height outcomes, right? So in the Netherlands, they have the healthcare system. More specifically, they focused on the maternal healthcare system, practices in place, and how within the first 10 weeks of baby being born, there are all these services provided to the mom to minimize any stress. And they acknowledge how much role stress plays on your health outcomes. Mm-hmm. And when we compare that to, say, in America, how stressful it is, or the exposure to stress in America comparatively, I'm not an expert, but I could go out on a limb. I would bet $10 that it's probably a little bit more stressful here. Mm-hmm. This whole conversation, these think pieces, these exposés, and even the healthism wellness people, it feels like intellectual edging. Whereas you have to know that it doesn't end where you're saying it ends. Maybe you do know, maybe you don't. Maybe it's intentional, maybe it's not. But I think the climax of it comes back and nobody wants to get there, because then what?
Can you say more?
On intellectual edging?
Yes. Break it down.
Okay. So say for example, the argument is packaged foods, processed foods are bad.
Okay.
Ultra processed foods are bad.
The worst.
They're bad. They're terrible. Mm-hmm. You should not eat anything packaged. Mm-hmm. Right? And then the response to it is everything is processed. So what are you saying? And then I have started to see kind of this full circle moment where now it's well, we don't mean those processed foods. You and I both know that the first statement is wrong.
Correct.
And so let's go with that. What do we really mean with statement number one before, why are we only critiquing statement 3? Let's go back to square one. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of you can see people getting this close. They're almost there to recognizing, I could make food choices. I could make better food choices, right? I could add whatever to my meal. But what influences those choices? And it's nope, I just decided that I'm going to eat better. And so I did. And now I'm healthy. And if I did it, you could do it too. Mm. And it's you almost got there. You almost started to understand. It's you're right on the cusp of you're on the edge. There has been a lot of foreplay back and forth happening on social media. And then what do we get? General Mills is lobbying against the FDA. and it's food shaming. And it's like, wah, wah. Like, okay, fine. This has to be a kink. This has to be like, not to kink, not saying, you know, people are allowed to like what they like. And maybe that's just what this is. And I think like this is partly why I have grown tired of like even making content like this, because there's no climax. There's never a release. It never comes to fruition. It always comes back to healthism and the foreplay.
And class.
But you never get the oomph. It's always just the climb. And maybe some people like that, and I love that for them. And I feel like that's what a lot of the content is like. You can't point a finger. There's no finger to be pointed. There's nothing to point it at. Because I think then you begin to realize that like you can't provide individual solutions to systemic problems.
Right. If the problem is capitalism, and if I do a story on capitalism, or if I do a story on even redlining, like that actually could have policy changes. But what responsibility do I then have as a journalist or even a human to address these things if I've done a deep dive? That sounds hard. But what I can do is say that people need to be making better choices, and let me just highlight one area in which you should be doing that.
And that seems so much easier. And then you get the added bonus to shame women for being on the internet.
Shame people for eating cereal.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's all very interesting. I think there's a lot of layers. And I think that when you peel it back, it just reinforces how frivolous I think a lot of this is. And I go back to Sasha talking about his win, advocating for disabled college loan havers. And I think that that's great. I'm like, that's awesome. You can say from point A to point B, there is a benefit objectively. And I think that that's fantastic. And I don't want to diminish his work in doing that. But also like, okay, so what is point B? We're identifying that food industry is not to be trusted. And I wholeheartedly agree.
Industry is not to be trusted. Okay. Sorry.
Agree.
Yeah.
All industries.
Right. Okay.
And then, so then what? So then what? What does that mean? Does that like, I must have missed it. Or I wonder if that's like a part 4, part 3. Are we going to reevaluate the ways in which food is accessible to people? Are we going to evaluate the ways in which groceries decide where they're going to build? Are we going to evaluate the ways in which America's like subsidized farming versus regenerative farming versus like putting and I'm not saying like farmers are to blame. I'm not saying like any of those people, like it's all fucked. And I think that like acknowledging the fuckery is like step 1, because right now it looks like, oh, everything is Gucci up until you get to the store. And I wonder if this is just part of that intellectual edging, understanding the role of genetics and how those influence your health outcomes. Because then who's to blame? How can I make you feel bad about something and sell you the solution if a lot of your problems are just hereditary? I think everybody actually, if you think about it, everyone experiences stress. And so to say that your stress is more stressful than the stress that I have experienced, it completely invalidates my stress. And so to blame your stress on your health outcomes is selfish. So be less selfish and do what I did. And that was, I simply went to the store, I bought seeds, and I grew all my food myself. And I stopped going to the doctors. I stopped doing this. I stopped doing that. I found my own practitioners who, validated and like all this stuff. And it's like, okay, like we're not even talking about the same things anymore. We're not even on the same page. You're in different books. We're on different bookshelves. We're in a different bookstore. And it's like, there's no point because I don't feel like we're in a place of having productive communication at that point.
Yeah. And I feel like this perpetuation of the same nutrition story over and over again, like the same lens, the same individual choice, the same, like, just continues to perpetuate that as the option. And so if people are, say, starting a nonprofit newsroom, Clara, interested in maybe public health, I just want to pitch something that would be like a public health policy level conversation that could lead to a solution, because journalists have and will continue to influence policy and public opinion. But what do you want that to be as someone in a place and a position to do so is what it comes down to for me. Like, you are making choices. You are making choices. People often don't have choices, but you are making them.
Right. I just picture that, like, Oprah GIF when she was talking to Meghan Markle. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
The were you silenced? Were you silent or were you silenced?
Oh.
It's kind of like, did you have a choice or was the choice given to you? Right? You can choose better foods. You can go out and make a good food choice. Your choices are McDonald's or starve.
Well,
pick the good choice.
If, Clara, you saved up that McDonald's money, but also enough money to take a bus or a BART or a train to a Trader Joe's, Clara, you could get a chicken salad. Okay? Mm-hmm.
Oh, I hadn't even thought about that. I feel like this is exactly the finisher that I was looking for.
Okay, I guess we should. I didn't get to talk to you about co-optation. I didn't get to talk to you about the idea that two thin white women founded intuitive eating. It's a disaster, and I loved this. So I'm going to end it and bring you and or anybody who wants to talk about the idea that people co-founded something that Indigenous communities and communities of color have been doing for centuries. It's fine. Come back on. We're going to do that. Clara, thank you for coming back on the show. I hope that this has scored more points towards your retirement.
I hope.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed, man. Mm-hmm. Fingers and toes.
I look forward to your vesting. And then maybe, you know what? You can open a nonprofit newsroom after that, okay? Or
yeah, I bet
take your
people
money.
Would love to read it.
Yeah.
People
would take your money and buy your own island because you've been talking about this stuff and it's exhausting. That's something else.
I'm going to rest. I'm just going to rest.
I think that's a great idea. All right. I appreciate you. Thanks again to Clara for coming on the show. You can find links to her TikTok, Instagram, and Substack in the show notes. This episode was over an hour total. You can find the full, mostly unedited version on the Patreon. The examination has a lot of traction after the story and a lot of power to lead conversations now. At least I think. Will they make choices to tell stories about systemic problems and build a narrative that is compelling and not sensational? Or will it continue to be about clicks and giggles? They said they're listening to the critiques, and I hope this is one of them. There was so much, Clara, and I didn't even get into, including co-optation and talking about intuitive eating overall. I think I'll need an entirely separate episode on intuitive eating, its history, how it's been helpful for many people, how it makes many people lots of money, and how it continues to gatekeep providers in the eating disorder field. If you have questions about intuitive eating, thoughts, or personal experiences, I'd love to hear them. You can email them to makingitawkwardpod@gmail.com or share them anonymously in the reviews of the show. Until next time, friends, make it awkward. This has been Making It Awkward. I've been your host, Jessica Wilson. The best way to support the show is by rating, reviewing, and sharing it with a friend. You can become a sustaining Patreon member of the show, which will support the editing and episode mixing of everyone's favorite editor, Jen Jacobs. You'll also get bonus content and extra dad content. This is a production of The Body Politic and is supported by Patreon members in the Legacy of Sacramento Outboard Services.